Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. So here's the thing about my property. I inherited this beautiful lakefront house from my grandparents about 5 years ago. The place has been in our family since the 1960s, back when this whole area was just scattered cabins and fishing spots. My grandfather built most of the house himself, including this gorgeous wooden dock that stretches out about 40 feet into the lake. That dock wasn't just some random structure. It was where my grandfather taught my dad to fish, where my dad taught me to fish, and where I spent countless mornings drinking coffee and watching the sun come up over the water. The dock was old, sure, weathered gray wood that had seen decades of winters and summers, but it was solid as a rock. My grandfather knew what he was doing when he built it, and I had all the original permits and documentation going back to 1971. Everything was completely legal and grandfathered and under current codes. The problem started about 3 years ago when this massive development went up right next to my property. They called it something generic like lakeside estates or whatever. Huge houses, perfectly manicured lawns, the whole suburban paradise thing. And of course they came with one of those homeowners associations that seemed to think they controlled the entire universe. Now here's the crucial detail that the HOA president apparently never bothered to understand. My property predates their development by about 30 years. I'm not part of their HOA. Never was, never will be. My house sits on the original platted land that was here long before anyone even dreamed of their little planned community. The first sign of trouble came about 6 months ago. I found this laminated note tucked into my front door one morning. It was from the HOA, signed by someone who introduced herself as the president. The note was polite but firm, suggesting that I consider updating my dock to match the community aesthetic standards. It mentioned how the older wooden structure was bringing down property values and didn't fit with the vision they had for their waterfront area. I'll admit I was annoyed. Who were these people to tell me what to do with my family's property? But I'm not the type to just get angry and do nothing. I sat down that same day and typed up a response. I made sure to send it certified mail so there'd be a paper trail. The letter was short and to the point. I explained that my property was not part of their HOA and never had been. I provided my property tax information and the legal description to make it crystal clear. Then I politely but firmly asked them to stop contacting me about my private property. I figured that would be the end of it. For a few weeks, it seemed like it was. No more notes, no more contact. I actually thought the HOA president had done her homework and realized she'd made a mistake. I should have known better. The morning everything went wrong started like any other. It was a Tuesday in late September, perfect fall weather. I'd gotten up early like I always do, made my coffee, and headed out to the dock to watch the sunrise. It's this routine I've had for years. Just me, my coffee, and the peaceful sound of water lapping against the dock posts. But as I walked down toward the water, I heard something that didn't belong. A diesel engine running and the sound of splintering wood. Heavy machinery working. I came around the corner of my house and stopped dead in my tracks. There was a small barge anchored about 20 feet from my dock, and on it was a crane with demolition equipment. My dock, the dock my grandfather built, was being torn apart right before my eyes. About half of it was already gone, just broken wood floating in the water. My coffee mug fell from my hand and shattered on the patio stones. I just stood there for a second in complete shock, watching these strangers destroy something that had been part of my family for over 30 years. Then the shock turned to rage. I ran down to the water's edge, screaming at the crew to stop. The foreman, this middle-aged guy who looked like he was just trying to do his job, shut down the crane and walked over to the edge of the barge. He told me he was sorry for the noise, but they had a work order from the HOA to remove what was listed as a hazardous and non-compliant structure. He showed me the paperwork, and sure enough, there was my address and a signature from the HOA president. I was shaking with anger at this point. I told him this was my private property and nobody had permission to touch anything on it. The guy looked confused and said he'd just been hired to do the job, and that all the legal stuff was supposed to be handled already. That's when I pulled out my phone and called 911. I reported that there was a crew actively destroying my private property without permission. I gave them my address and asked for police to respond immediately. I also asked them to send someone from code enforcement if possible. The demo crew stopped working completely once they realized police were coming. The foreman kept apologizing and saying he was just following the work order. I felt bad for him because he clearly had no idea what was really going on. But I was too angry to care much about his situation right then. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. 2 officers, one older guy who seemed to be in charge, and a younger woman who was taking notes on everything. I showed them my property deed, the survey that clearly marked my boundaries, and the copy of the certified letter I'd sent to the HOA telling them to leave me alone. The older officer looked at the work order and then at my documentation. He told the demo crew they needed to stop all work immediately until this got sorted out. Then he asked if anyone from the HOA was available to explain what was happening. That's when she showed up. The HOA president came walking down my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, looking absolutely pleased with herself. She was probably in her 50s, wearing one of those polo shirts with the development logo on it, and she had this smug expression like she'd just solved world hunger. She walked right up to the police officer and started explaining how grateful she was that they'd responded so quickly to help with the community cleanup project. She talked about how this old dock was a safety hazard and an eyesore that was bringing down property values for everyone in the development. The officer let her finish talking, then asked her very simply if this was her property. She said it wasn't her personal property, but it affected the community, and the HOA board had voted to authorize its removal in the interest of public safety and community standards. That's when I stepped in. I looked her right in the eye and said that she'd been sent a certified letter explaining that this was my private property and that I was not part of her HOA. I told her she'd just committed what I was pretty sure was felony property destruction. The officer's whole demeanor changed. He told the HOA president that she needed to stop talking immediately and that she just admitted to ordering the destruction of private property that didn't belong to her HOA. He instructed the demo crew to pack up and leave and said he was filing a complete report on the incident. The demo company guys couldn't get out of there fast enough. They loaded up their equipment and took off, leaving behind a barge full of the broken pieces of my grandfather's dock floating in the water. After the police left and I'd given my statement, I just stood there looking at what remained. About half the dock was completely gone. The other half was hanging at crazy angles, totally unsafe and unusable. 30 years of family history reduced to splinters and scrap wood. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about my grandfather's hands building those boards, about all the mornings I'd spent out there watching the sunrise, about teaching my own kids to fish from that same spot someday. The HOA president had taken all of that away with her arrogance and complete disregard for property rights. But I wasn't just going to sit there feeling sorry for myself. The next morning, I started making phone calls. I spent the morning researching property litigation attorneys in the area. I wanted someone who specialized in exactly this kind of case, someone who would understand the legal complexities and wouldn't let the HOA brush this under the rug. I found a firm that seemed perfect. The senior partner had handled dozens of property dispute cases, including several against HOAs that had overstepped their authority. When I called and explained what happened, his assistant got me in for a consultation that same afternoon. The lawyer, an older guy who'd been practicing for about 25 years, listened to my story with this expression that got more and more interested as I went on. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said this was one of the most clear-cut cases of property destruction he'd ever heard. He explained that we'd be filing a comprehensive lawsuit against 3 parties. First, the HOA itself for authorizing the destruction. Second, the HOA president personally because she'd acted outside her authority and ignored clear notice that she had no jurisdiction over my property. And third, the demolition company for failing to verify the work order and property ownership before beginning work. But here's where it got really interesting. The lawyer explained that because this was willful and malicious destruction of private property, we weren't just asking for the cost of replacing the old dock. We were going after treble damages, which meant triple the actual cost, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages to make sure this never happened again. He estimated that a new dock built to current codes would cost somewhere around $60,000. With treble damages, that became $180,000. Add in legal fees and punitive damages, and we were looking at well over $200,000 in total. The lawyer also filed an emergency restraining order that same week, prohibiting anyone from the HOA or any of their contractors from setting foot on my property for any reason. Over the next few months, the legal process played out exactly like my attorney had predicted. The HOA's insurance company got involved immediately, and they were not happy when they realized what their insured had done. The discovery phase was where things got really interesting. My lawyer subpoenaed all the HOA's meeting minutes, correspondence, and financial records. What we found was even worse than I'd expected. There was no formal board vote authorizing the dock demolition. None. The HOA president had acted completely on her own, without consulting the other board members or following any of the procedures laid out in their own bylaws. When we deposed her, she claimed she'd gotten verbal approval from another board member, but when we deposed that board member, he said all she'd done was mention that my dock looked old and he'd agreed that it had seen better days. He'd never agreed to have it demolished, and he was shocked to learn she'd taken his casual comment as authorization for destruction. The HOA president's defense was that she'd made an executive decision for the good of the community. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd acted in good faith based on safety concerns, but that fell apart when we pointed out that she'd never had the dock inspected by any qualified professional. The real nail in the coffin came when the insurance company found a clause in the HOA's policy that excluded coverage for acts of gross negligence or willful malfeasance by board members acting outside their authority. Since the president had acted without board approval and ignored my certified letter, the insurance company refused to cover the punitive damages or the treble damages. They agreed to cover the demolition company's portion of the settlement, since those guys had just been following what looked like legitimate work orders. But the bulk of the judgment was going to come directly out of the HOA's cash reserves. By spring, the HOA's lawyers were pushing hard for a settlement. They could see which way the wind was blowing, and they knew that going to trial would be even more expensive and embarrassing for their clients. The settlement came to exactly what my lawyer had predicted. $215,000 split between actual damages, treble damages, attorney fees, and punitive damages. The HOA agreed to pay the full amount within 60 days. Here's the beautiful part. That settlement completely wiped out the HOA's reserve fund. We're talking about money they'd been collecting from homeowners for over 10 years, saving up for major community improvements. They'd been planning to repave all the roads in the development, renovate the community pool, and replace the roof on their clubhouse. All of that money, every penny they'd saved, went to pay for my new dock. The fallout in the development was immediate and brutal. When the HOA announced that their reserves were gone and they'd need to assess each homeowner an additional $5,000 just to make the association solvent again, people lost their minds. There was an emergency homeowners meeting that I heard got pretty heated. The HOA president tried to blame me, saying I'd been unreasonable and litigious, but the other homeowners weren't buying it. They'd all seen the legal documents by then, and they knew exactly whose fault this was. She ended up resigning from the board in disgrace, and I heard through the grapevine that she put her house up for sale about a month later. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life planning my new dock. I hired the best marine construction company on the lake, the same outfit that built docks for some of the luxury resorts in the area. Instead of rebuilding the old wooden dock, we designed something completely new and absolutely gorgeous. The new dock is 48 feet long, made from high-end composite decking that looks like beautiful gray driftwood but will never rot, warp, or require staining. The railings are brushed stainless steel with built-in LED lighting that automatically turns on at dusk. There are electrical outlets every few feet, a water spigot for hosing down fish, and even a small storage cabinet built right into the structure. The whole thing is engineered to current codes and built to withstand anything the lake can throw at it. It's rated for hurricane-force winds and has a floating section at the end that adjusts automatically to water level changes. And the best part? It's absolutely, completely, 100% legal. Every permit filed, every inspection passed, every code requirement met and exceeded. The construction took about 2 months, and I have to admit I enjoyed every minute of it. Every morning I'd go out with my coffee and watch the progress, thinking about how the HOA's arrogance had paid for every single board and bolt. The day the dock was finished, I invited my parents over for the inaugural coffee sunrise. My dad stood there looking at this beautiful structure stretching out into the water and said it was even nicer than what Grandpa had built. But the story doesn't end there. About a month after the new dock was complete, I was sitting out there one evening watching the sunset when I noticed some activity across the water in the HOA development. Their community pool, which used to be this pristine blue centerpiece of their little paradise, had a huge blue tarp stretched across one corner where the roof had apparently started leaking. The roads throughout the development, which used to be perfect smooth asphalt, were now dotted with potholes that hadn't been repaired. I could see orange construction cones sitting around the worst ones. Most telling of all, there was a growing collection of for sale signs scattered throughout the neighborhood. Apparently, when you hit homeowners with an unexpected $5,000 assessment on top of their regular HOA dues, some of them decide it's time to move somewhere else. I found out later from someone who lived in the development that the special assessment had caused a near revolt. About a third of the homeowners had refused to pay it, which meant the HOA had to take out a loan just to cover their basic operating expenses. They'd had to cancel all their planned improvements, lay off their landscaping crew, and even stop heating the community pool during shoulder season to save money. The irony wasn't lost on me. These people had moved to their perfect planned community specifically to avoid the kind of property disputes and legal hassles that come with living in less regulated areas, and now, because their board president had decided to mess with someone else's property, they were dealing with exactly the kind of expensive drama they'd thought they were avoiding. But the best part came about 6 months later. I was out on the dock early one Saturday morning, enjoying my usual coffee and sunrise routine. The new dock had become everything I'd hoped it would be. The composite decking never got too hot in summer or slippery in winter. The LED lighting made evening fishing absolutely perfect. The electrical outlets meant I could charge my phone or run a small radio without any hassle. As I sat there watching the sun come up over the water, I noticed a familiar figure walking along the shoreline on the HOA side of the lake. It was the former HOA president, and she was carrying what looked like a real estate photographer's equipment. I realized she must be taking pictures for her listing. Her house had been on the market for months, but apparently it wasn't selling as quickly as she'd hoped. Property values in the development had taken a hit because of all the deferred maintenance and the reputation the HOA had earned for financial mismanagement. She looked across the water toward my property, and I could see her staring at my gorgeous new dock gleaming in the morning light. The solar-powered LED strips had just turned off as the sun came up, and the whole structure looked like something out of a luxury resort magazine. I raised my coffee mug in a little salute. I don't think she could see the gesture clearly from that distance, but I like to imagine she got the message. That afternoon, I was working in my garden when my neighbor from the other side, an older gentleman who'd lived in the area since before the development was built, came over to chat. He'd been following the whole saga with great interest, partly because he'd had his own minor run-ins with the HOA trying to extend their authority beyond their actual boundaries. He told me he'd heard through the local gossip network that the former HOA president was having trouble selling her house. Apparently, potential buyers were doing their research and discovering the financial problems in the development. Nobody wanted to buy into a community where they might face surprise assessments and where the HOA had a track record of expensive legal mistakes. My neighbor also mentioned that the new HOA board was being extremely careful about every decision they made. They'd instituted new policies requiring board votes for any expenditure over $500 and mandatory legal review before taking any action that might affect non-member properties. Basically, my lawsuit had taught them exactly the lesson I'd hoped it would teach them. Over the following months, I settled into a routine with my new dock that was even better than what I'd had before. The old wooden dock had been beautiful and sentimental, but this new one was functional in ways I hadn't even thought to want. The built-in storage meant I could keep fishing gear, cleaning supplies, and dock maintenance tools right where I needed them. The electrical outlets made it easy to run lights for evening entertaining or power tools for any maintenance work. Friends and family who visited were always impressed by the quality of the construction. My dad particularly loved the way the floating section automatically adjusted to water levels, something that had always been a problem with the old fixed-height dock. But beyond the practical improvements, there was something deeply satisfying about knowing exactly how this beautiful structure had been paid for. Every time I flipped on those LED lights or plugged something into one of the outlets, I remembered the HOA president's arrogant assumption that she could just destroy my property without consequences. The legal victory had been satisfying, but the real satisfaction came from the daily reminder that actions have consequences, especially when you mess with other people's property rights. About a year after everything was settled, I was approached by a local reporter who was doing a story about property rights disputes in lakefront communities. Apparently, my case had become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles, and several attorneys were using it as an example when advising HOAs about the limits of their authority. The reporter wanted to interview me about the experience, but I declined. I didn't need the publicity, and honestly, the whole thing had worked out so well that I didn't want to come across as gloating. The facts spoke for themselves, but I did tell the reporter that if there was one thing I'd learned from the whole experience, it was the importance of documentation. Keep records of everything, send important communications by certified mail, and never assume that other people understand the legal boundaries of their authority just because they act like they do. I also mentioned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own bad decisions. I hadn't set out to bankrupt the HOA's budget or force their president to resign. Those things happened because of choices she made, not because of anything vindictive I did. These days, my morning coffee routine on the dock is more peaceful than ever. The HOA development across the water has stabilized somewhat. They eventually got their roads repaired and their pool fixed, though it took them almost 2 years to build their reserves back up to where they could afford the work. There's been a complete turnover on the HOA board, and from what I hear, the new leadership is much more focused on actually serving their community rather than trying to control everyone around them. They've never contacted me again about anything, which suits me just fine. The former president's house finally sold, though it took over a year and she had to drop the price significantly below what comparable homes in the development were worth. I heard she moved to a different state, possibly to get a fresh start somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be. I have a beautiful dock that's better than anything I could have afforded to build myself. I have a clear legal precedent that protects my property rights, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I stood up for myself when someone tried to take advantage of me. Every evening when I sit out on the dock watching the sunset, those LED lights automatically turn on as the sky darkens. They're not just lights to me. They're tiny beacons that represent the price of entitlement and the importance of respecting other people's property rights. The HOA president thought she could just take what wasn't hers because it didn't fit her vision of how things should be. She learned the hard way that property rights exist for a reason and that there are real consequences when you ignore them. I never wanted a new dock, but I'm grateful to her for providing one, and I suspect the taxpayers in her new community are going to be a lot safer now that she's learned how expensive it can be to overstep your authority. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that cost you everything you thought you could get away with. Looking back, I realized this whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself. I could have just accepted the loss of my dock and moved on. I could have rebuilt it myself and chalked the whole thing up to bad luck and dealing with difficult neighbors. But sometimes, when someone does something truly outrageous, the only way to make sure it doesn't happen again is to make the consequences so clear and so expensive that nobody else will be tempted to try the same thing. The new dock is beautiful, functional, and perfectly legal. But more importantly, it's a daily reminder that property rights matter, that documentation saves the day, and that arrogance can be very, very expensive. Every morning when I sit out there with my coffee watching the sunrise over the water, I think about my grandfather who built the original dock with his own hands. He taught me about hard work, about taking care of what's yours, and about standing up for what's right. I think he would have been proud of how this whole thing turned out. Not because I got revenge on someone who wronged me, but because I stood up for the property rights he worked so hard to establish, and I made sure those rights would be respected going forward. The HOA learned their lesson the expensive way, and everyone who hears this story learns it the easy way. Either approach works, but I suspect most people would prefer to learn it the easy way. As I finish writing this, it's been almost 2 years since the dock was destroyed and rebuilt. The legal case is completely closed, the settlement money has been paid, and life has returned to normal. Better than normal, actually, given the upgrade in dock quality. I still start most days out there with my coffee, watching the sun come up over the water. The composite decking has aged beautifully. The stainless steel railings still shine like new, and those LED lights continue to turn on automatically every evening. But the best part isn't the dock itself. The best part is knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered, that I documented everything properly, and that I followed through when someone tried to take advantage of me. Property rights aren't just legal concepts. They're the foundation of being able to live peacefully in your own home, on your own land, without having to worry about neighbors who think they know better than you do about what's best for your property. The former HOA president learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost her community over $200,000 in the process. But sometimes expensive lessons are the ones that stick the best. And every morning when I sit on my beautiful HOA-funded dock, watching the sunrise over the lake, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right isn't just about winning. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to go through the same fight you did. That makes the coffee taste even better. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Some years ago, I worked at bank office, not in the US. I was mediocre at sales, but good at service and processes, conditions, pricings, etc. So I was put at administrator position, not a manager one. My job was to meet incoming clients and help them to solve their problem by helping them with the ATM or mobile app, or by navigating them to the right specialist via electronic queue, etc. So there was this woman, let's call her customer. She came to the office and asked for money withdrawal. I recommended her to use ATM, and she told me she already used it but can withdraw more due to daily limit. I asked how much she wanted to withdraw. It was 600,000 of our local currency, and replied that due to bank policy to withdraw that amount of money via cashier, she need to order it in 5 days for safety reasons. And only amount we can give her today is 150,000 without fee and 300,000 more with 5% fee, but she can use ATM tomorrow and withdraw all needed amount with no fees because daily limit will refresh. She wasn't happy, and I can understand this, but then she started being rude and unreasonable. Customer: I need to talk with more experienced employee. What do you mean I can't withdraw my money? It's a bank. Me: they will tell you the same. It's a bank policy. Fastest and cheapest way for you to withdraw needed amount is to use ATM next day. Technically after midnight if it's somehow urgent. Customer: no, I don't want to talk with you. You are some newbie. Just give me queue number and I'll talk with proper bank worker. Now worth noting that I was most experienced employee in the office in terms of operational work, including manager. So I giggled inside, but that was her clear will. So I gave her number and moved on. 20 minutes later, yeah, it was busy evening, her number was called to desk and she started asking same questions from a new girl, worked around 1 month at this point. Let's name this girl Eve. She wasn't familiar enough with everything, so she started casual identification procedure by checking client ID in the UV, searching for client profile in database, sending her SMS code to approve entering profile, etc. So around 5 minutes more were gone. Then Eve asked what operation lady want to do, and lady repeated her question. Eve tried to start withdrawal and noticed she can't make more than 450,000 and there is fee. And what do you think? She called me to help. I walked around the desk and asked Eve what happened. Eve: look, customer, want to withdraw 600,000 and I can't type more than 450,000 and there is fee. Me: I'm sorry, I can't help here. Client insisted to have more experienced employee to answer his questions and left back to my workplace. After that, there was some banter between customer and poor Eve, trying to explain same stuff while I typed everything to her in work chat. Then she gave up and offered customer to talk with manager if she's unhappy. She waited 20 more minutes for manager and heard same info I told her 50 minutes ago and Eve repeated 20 minutes ago. Today she can have 150K for free and 300K more with fees. After midnight she can have 600K with no fees via ATM, and in case of big withdrawals in future she need to order cash in advance. Customer left furiously, not looking at me. The next one is an entitled people story. When I was 16, I took my GED. The process was detailed and the rules made clear. This group was for people seeking to take the whole exam at once, as opposed to taking a single subject portion at a time. Each subject was its own test. We had X amount of time to complete the section. At the end of that period, we got a break to stretch our legs or use the restroom. When filing back into the room, the tests were ready, placed upside down so you could only see the blank back of the paper. We were told not to turn our papers over and begin until time started, and we were instructed to do so. They said it at the start and again before each section. After taking multiple sections and being there for hours, we were to begin the next portion of the exam. About half the people were back in the room from the break. One man, I would say maybe early 20s, sat down, turned his paper over and started working. The two proctors in the room told him to stop. The timer hadn't started yet and the door was open, people filing in and out, etc. He ignored them. They said it again. He still kept going. One went up to him directly and said he needed to stop as there is a strict time limit per section. He looked up at her and yelled a string of profanity and said he had to get to work and didn't have time to wait around. They explained they couldn't allow it. He needed to stop, and if he proceeded, they would have to cancel out the portion entirely. Again, he responded with an onslaught of indignation and profanity about how he didn't care what the rules were. He had to get to work by X time, and he can't wait a few more minutes to start. The calm and patient proctor tried to help him, explaining that he would just need to wait a few minutes, take the test in accordance to the simple rules, and that he even had enough time to make a call to his work if needed. That was apparently an offensive offer. He was clear that he's a grown man. He didn't act like one. Not some kid. You can't tell him there are rules he has to follow. So he was told this was his last warning. The rules are the rules and they apply to everyone equally. If he didn't stop, he would need to leave. And if he left, the entire test wouldn't be submitted and he would have wasted the whole thing, all those hours. He chose to leave. He angrily tossed his stuff into his bag while he yelled at them for being bitches and telling them to go fuck themselves and fuck off and fuck you, and pretty much all the fucks. He then stormed out of the room, and about a minute later we started the test. To top us off, we were told the schedule for the day, what time each section starts, when it ends, how long the breaks were, down to the minute, from the start of the day, and before each new section. We were also told all of this when we had all gone to our registration meeting a couple weeks before the exam. We were all given a clear schedule of the day, breakdown of the time, and the simple rules that were imperative and needed to be followed. For example, you can't just flip your paper over early and start on it whenever you want. This guy absolutely knew all of this for weeks. Yet, he apparently thought he could take a shift at work during the same time as the exam, because he could go through the test at his own leisure when he wanted to start, because he doesn't have to follow rules. The rules were clearly for everyone else. He should be able to do what he wanted, and when he finds out the rules apply to him too, he throws a tantrum, verbally abuses the very nice staff who are simply doing their job, and stubbornly threw away hours of work. It's not like he was surprised with the rules or schedule. It's not like he didn't agree to all of it. He just truly seemed to think he should be allowed to break the rules he didn't want to follow and punish anyone who tells him otherwise. Anyway, thank you for watching.